You're listening to the micro version of the Savage Lovecast at savage.love.
If you're stuck in a relationship quandary, or if you're looking for sexual harmony, well, there's nothing you can't ask on the Savage Lovecast.
I'm going to resist the urge to enter the diaper discourse. It's not an overwhelming urge, easier resisted than some of my other urges. And if you don't know what I'm talking about here, if you don't get the reference, consider yourself lucky. The diaper blow up, the diaper blowout is just one of the things that happened in the last week that I could talk about today. And in our current news and culture climate, really, a week is an eternity. Just since last Monday, Trump was indicted, final fuckingly, God bless you, Stormy Daniels. The New York Times lost its blue check on Twitter. What the fuck, Elon Musk? And Bud Light has brought out a new line of Pride Bud Light cans in April for reasons. Lots to talk about. Lots of very recent events, hyper recent events, but I'm not quite ready to move on from what happened last Monday. The mass shooting at the private Christian grade school in Nashville, where 3 9-year-olds and 3 adults were murdered by a lunatic armed with an AR-15, the mass shooter's weapon of choice. The shooter, who was killed at the scene by the police, appears to have been a trans man. Now, there is no epidemic of trans mass shooters out there. There's just this one. A little perspective, there have been 130 mass shootings in the United States in 2023, according to the New York Times. So far, that's more than one mass shooting per day. The overwhelming majority of those mass shootings were perpetrated by cisgender men with guns. So, if anything, trans people, as a proportion of the population, are less of a danger, less of a threat, less likely to shoot up a school or a church or a synagogue or a movie theater than cisgender males, even after Nashville. Now, anyone who would walk into a school and kill children is not sane. I'm all for keeping guns out of the hands of the not sane, and since we don't often find out that someone isn't sane enough to own a gun and shouldn't have a gun until after they've opened fire in a church or a synagogue or a school or a Walmart or a movie theater or a grocery store, I don't think we should let anyone own a gun. I think we should err on the side of keeping guns out of the hands of lunatics by keeping guns out of the hands of absolutely everybody. But the people who think guns make us safe and the solution to gun violence is always go out there and buy more guns, which if that worked, we would have the lowest rates of gun violence in the world, not the highest. We have more guns per capita than any other country on earth, and we have more gun violence, not less. Gun violence right now is the leading cause of death among children in the United States. Gun violence, not LGBT books, not CRT, not drag shows, not video games, not neo-pronouns, not grown-ass men with diaper fetishes. It's the gun fetishists that we need to protect our children from and that we fail to year after year, mass shooting after mass shooting. Now, some social conservatives, like Ben Shapiro, are suggesting we pass gun laws in the wake of the murders in Nashville to take guns away, to take AR-15s away, but just from trans people. Shapiro's trolling, of course. The left loves gun control. The left supports the trans community, so they think it's hilarious to dunk on the left by proposing gun control legislation that targets the trans community after one trans person shot up a school, murdered 6 people. A school where, by the way, the doors were locked and the teachers were armed. I'm not going to play the relevant clip from Ben Shapiro's podcast where he called for laws banning trans people from owning guns. The clip is out there. It's not hard to find. And I'm not going to play it here because there isn't enough Viagra in Gilead to undo the damage the sound of that man's voice does to my dick. But I want to say that I agree with Emmy-winning TV writer and showrunner and trans woman Shady Potosky, who posted Shapiro's call for banning trans people from owning firearms and said, yes, please, pass any gun law. Anyone. Don't argue with them, Potosky went on. No hot takes. Hold them to this. Call their bluff. That's Shady's argument. Call his bluff. I agree with Shady. Yes, please. For the right wing in this country, as we've seen over the last few years, there isn't a piece of anti-trans legislation they won't embrace. But the right hates gun control. So maybe we wrap some gun control legislation up in anti-trans legislation, a little fucked up American turducken, we can hoist them with their own petard and actually pass some gun restriction. So go ahead, right-wingers, ban trans people from owning weapons of mass destruction, from owning assault rifles, buying AR-15s, just to prove that banning assault rifles, AR-15s, the mass shooter's weapon of choice, is a thing we can do. We can place limits on gun ownership. And who knows, maybe if we ban trans people from owning AR-15s after one mass shooting perpetrated by a trans person, we will ban straight guys from owning AR-15s after the next mass shooting. After the next straight guy with an AR-15 walks into a mosque or a synagogue or a church or a grocery store or a shopping mall or a Walmart, maybe we will find ourselves on that slippery slope conservatives are always warning us about. I agree with Shady. Let's call their bluff. No one needs these weapons. Weapons designed for killing human beings. Weapons that have been used again and again to pulverize children. Take them away from someone just to prove that we can take them away from everyone. And I don't want to see more legislation passed that specifically targets trans people, but I think we can risk calling their bluff here because they are not going to pass this law. The Ben Shapiros of the world, the gun fetishists, they love their guns more than they love anything. More than they love their own kids. More than they love your kids, for sure. They love their guns even more than they hate trans people. So we can safely call their bluff here, confident that this will be the one piece of anti-trans legislation that doesn't sail through both houses of the Florida state legislature in record time. Now, like I said, I'd like to live in a world without private gun ownership. I'd like to live in a world with, I don't know what to call them, maybe well-regulated militias, but that's not going to happen. So a word to the problem, to the gun owners out there. I've never understood why gun owners, why you people yourselves don't want the bar for gun ownership set high. If owning a gun required rigorous training, background checks, licensing, you would hear that someone owned a gun and you would think, that's someone I want around in an emergency. Even people who didn't like guns would associate gun ownership then with safety, security, competency. But in a society where literally any idiot can walk into a gun store and buy a gun, where any dangerous lunatic can stockpile weapons like AR-15s, where teenagers can open carry, you don't hear that someone owns a gun and think, that's someone I want around in an emergency. What you think when you hear that someone owns a gun is that person could be a dangerous lunatic. Or they might be one of those responsible gun owners. Gun nuts insist they all are. But I'm not going to risk it. For my own safety, for my family's safety, I'm going to assume that this asshole with a gun is dangerous. Right now, gun owners, you're not the people we want around in an emergency. Gun owners are the emergency. Could be different. Hey, gun nuts, you could live in a world where people actually looked up to you. Even people who didn't like guns. People like me. Faggots who don't like guns. We would look at you with your guns and we would think, as much as I don't like guns, this guy with that gun, you know what? He did the work. He took the classes. He passed the background checks. He knows what he's doing. And much as I hate guns, I have to respect that. If gun ownership was an achievement, if we could infer from gun ownership that someone standing there with his gun was knowledgeable and responsible, people would look up at gun owners. You would be admired, not feared. But sadly, some of you just want to be feared. That's what assholes carrying AR-15s into Wendy's are after. So maybe think about it like this instead. If gun ownership was strictly regulated, if the bar was set high, gun owners would be admired and feared. Instead, right now, we have to assume, for our own safety, that you're all a bunch of fucking dangerous lunatics because every mass shooter was a responsible gun owner until they started shooting up a classroom or a grocery store or a church or a synagogue. People who love guns, people who sometimes seem to love guns more than they love children, shouldn't want just anyone to have guns because at some point, the pile of dead children is going to be too big to ignore and you're all going to have your guns taken away. I am not looking forward to that day. I don't want to see the pile of dead children grow that large. I would rather let you have your licensed, safely stored, and insured guns than sacrifice the tens of thousands of children it's clearly going to take before we finally reach a point where we say, enough. All right, Coming up on today's show on the Micro Savage Lovecast and the Magnum Savage Lovecast, Dr. Lori Brotto is back to talk about asexuality. And on the Magnum, one of our favorite guests returns. Mistress Matisse is here with me to answer listener questions about sex work, doing it, having done it, and having it done for you for the first time. We cover all the bases. Also this week, Magnum subscribers. There's going to be a new Sex and Politics in your feed with UK journalist Zoe Strimple. We talk about the political crisis in Israel, where she's currently visiting, pinkwashing, age gap relationships, and whether Leonardo DiCaprio is a male hag. Look for a new Sex and Politics in your feeds this Thursday, Magnum subs. And if you are not yet a Magnum sub and you want the full Savage Lovecast, more guests, more questions, more answers, no ads, and Sex and Politics, and invites to special live events, go subscribe to the Savage Lovecast now at savage.love. This episode of the Savage Lovecast is brought to you by Foria. Foria crafts 100% all-natural sexual wellness products so you can experience deeper intimacy and transcendent moments of sexual pleasure solo or with your partner or partners. Get 20% off your first order by visiting foriawellness.com/savage. That's FORIA wellness.com/savage. This episode is brought to you by Helix Sleep, the best mattress for your individualized comfort. Right now, my listeners get up to 20% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows. Go to helixsleep.com/savage.
Hi, Dan. I'm an assigned male at birth, NB, and me and my boyfriend are organizing our first orgy. Since there's been so many orgy questions, I figured I'd chip in. We're actually organizing it around the Hum Film Festival. We're playing the festival at home as like a little cinema experience. And if the guests feel so inclined, they're allowed to be their own pornos live at the party. And hopefully it evolves from there. I'm very excited. I'll let you know how it goes. I have this idea for a game called Spin the Bottom, where a bottom sits on a office chair and we spin it, and people make a circle around, and whoever ends up with a face gets some oral, and whoever ends up with the ass either does some fucking or some spanking. We'll see. It should be fun. So my question is about rejection and intimacy. I have a lot of trans friends that I brought in, and my boyfriend brought a lot of gay friends. And I'm not sure what are some good guidelines for breaking some of those boundaries. Because for some of the trans folks, trans guys, trans girls, NBs of all shapes, we're more used to the idea that everyone's a little bi, that like you're allowed to be attracted to the masculinity in someone, whatever their body, and vice versa. But they're not used, like the gays are not super used to sex spaces with other kinds of bodies and other genders. And the transes might have a little bit of a hard time when it comes to like referring to body parts or expectations of behaviors in the spaces that can be kind of new. So I would appreciate a little help in like how to break down some of those boundaries so that we're not like lecturing for hours, but also so that we minimize conflict. The other issue is I'm having a couple of like long-term friends that I care a lot about and that I've never had any sexual experiences with come to this. And I'm comfortable with it, but my boyfriend is finding it a little awkward and confusing because for him, these boundaries of like what is a sexual connection and what is a regular connection is very, they're very sharp boundaries for him. And for me, it's a little more like bring in anyone who could enjoy the space. And so I'm wondering what are some good ways to navigate a good friendship having a sexual component, and what are some good ways to like know who to invite and what relationships can handle that.
Not everybody's even a little bit bi. Bisexuality is valid. Sapiosexuality is valid. Demisexuality is valid. Every sexuality is valid. Homosexuality and heterosexuality also valid. That said, you're right. A lot more people are a little bit more bi than a lot of people ever realized. You see surveys showing that Gen Z millennials, many, many more Gen Z and millennials identify as LGBTQ plus than Gen X or boomers. And that's because a lot of those people identify as bisexual. And some of them are hetero-romantic and heterosexual, but demisexual. There's some squeaking in under the LGBTQ umbrella at the margins, but a lot more people identify as bi now because they've realized they are bi. So I don't want to invalidate your point. You're right. A lot more people are a little bit bi than anybody ever realized. That doesn't invalidate the sexualities of people who are not at all bi, people who are homosexual or heterosexual. I don't know how we've backed into a world where all different sexualities are valid except those two, which are, in the case of heterosexuality, the overwhelming majority of sexualities that people might have all over the world, and homosexuality, which I think is the after bisexual, the third place, the second runner-up. Okay, so this orgy is going to be a disaster if spin the bottom is compulsory. If you're going to have a lot of people at a sex party of differing sexual orientations and gender identities and interests, everything needs to be optional. If you explain the rules of spin the bottom, somebody who wouldn't be comfortable orally servicing a penis haver or vagina haver, or having their bottom fingered or fucked by somebody of a gender expression or sexual orientation they're not interested in who would be also taking part in the game, will know to opt out of that game. Just don't make it compulsory. I've been to sex parties where the invite list was exclusively people with a niche or very particular sexual interest. And, you don't invite vanilla people who are triggered by even hints of power imbalances or violence to a BDSM hardcore play party. And you don't invite, the kind of gay men who might be squicked out by cunnilingus to an everything, everyone, everywhere all at once kind of sex party, right? And, those kind of gynophobic gay men who can't be in a room where women are being sexual, or people who are assigned female at birth are being sexual, would know to skip the party if they were familiarized with what the party's about. So tell people what your party's about. Invite as many friends and people of differing sexual orientations and gender identities and NBs and trans people as you want to invite. And then if somebody doesn't come, don't depose them. Don't interrogate them. Don't prosecute them. Just let them opt off the guest list if they know they wouldn't be comfortable being sexual in that space. And people have a right to opt out of intimate spaces where people are being sexual, or they're going to be expected or feel pressured to be sexual if they don't want to go or be there, or they feel like they would ruin it for other people. Some people find different kinds of different sex stuff, including vanilla hetero, cishet sex, including gay, homonormative sex, squicky. And what do you do with that? Well, you can tell people what you're doing is wrong, or you can say, I have this feeling and that's my shit, and I'm not going to risk being in a room where somebody's doing the thing that they love that turns them on, and then they look across the room and I have unconsciously, with no malicious intent, gotten a look on my face because I'm a little freaked out or grossed out that makes them feel bad. So I'm just not going to go. So invite as many people as you want to invite. Make sure everybody understands what the party is entirely about. And then let the RSVPs, rendezvous perverts, roll in. And then see how it goes. But anything that happens at the party, you can't make everybody play. People have to be empowered to opt in, opt out, play with the people they want to play with, not play with the people they don't want to play with. And no one should be put in a situation where they have to go through with something that makes them uncomfortable, or they feel like they're going to have to reject someone very publicly during a game of spin the bottom in a way that's going to hurt that person. Can you see how mutually coercive a moment like that could be for both people on either end of that spinning bottom? You don't want to do that. And you didn't say anything about spin the bottom being a game everybody had to play. But just as nobody should be shamed for opting in to spin the bottom, nobody should be shamed for opting out of spin the bottom. And finally, quickly, your boyfriend's issue. You don't have a problem fucking friends. Your boyfriend feels differently. If he doesn't want his platonic friends at this party because he would feel uncomfortable being sexual in front of them, well, you have to honor that. He isn't doing it wrong. You're not doing it wrong. He isn't necessarily doing it right. You're not necessarily doing it right. He just has different boundaries, and you need to listen to him and respect them. You can push back. I'm all for pushing back a little bit. You can ask him to interrogate his boundaries. You can demonstrate to him that you are capable of having friends you fuck. But if that's not something that he's capable of, don't impose that on him. And don't make it some sort of litmus test about how sexually open or non-oppressed or progressive he might be. That is a limit that he is allowed to have. And you can make him think about it. You can have a conversation about it. And if he still has that limit, you have to respect it. You want proof? I think Helix mattresses are the best mattresses. I just bought another one. That means there's now a Helix mattress in every bedroom in our house. Because when you're poly, you may not get to sleep with your favorite person every night, but you can sleep on your favorite mattress every night. Helix Sleep is a premium mattress brand that provides tailored mattresses based on your unique sleep preferences. The Helix Sleep lineup offers 14 unique mattresses, including a collection of luxury models, a mattress for big and tall sleepers, and even a mattress made just for kids. So, how will you know which Helix mattress works best for you, your body, and your polycule? Take the Helix Sleep Quiz and find your perfect mattress or mattresses in under 2 minutes. And your personalized mattress will be shipped straight to your door, free of charge. We got another Midnight Lux model because we wanted medium firmness. We tend to thrash around a little bit at night, and these mattresses, such an improvement over our old mattresses. Helix knows there's no better way to test out a new mattress than by sleeping on it in your own home. That's why they offer a 100-night sleep trial. You can try out your new Helix mattress, see how your body adjusts, and if you decide it's not the best fit, you're welcome to return it for a full refund. Plus, Helix mattresses are American-made and come with a 10 to 15-year warranty, depending on the model. And remember, you get a 100-night sleep trial. If you don't love it, and I know you will, but if you don't, they will pick it up for you and give you a full refund. Helix is offering 20% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for my listeners. I got my free pillows with my new mattress. Go and get yours. Go to helixsleep.com/Savage for 20% off your new mattress, your 2 free pillows. This is their best offer yet. It won't last long. With Helix, better sleep, whichever bedroom you're sleeping in tonight, starts now.
Hey, Dan. So I've been in an unintentionally companionate relationship with my boyfriend for over 2 years now. From the beginning of our relationship, it never really included sex. We have had sex 1 or 2 times, but for the most part, it doesn't feel important to our relationship. We recently opened our relationship for this reason because we both still want sex and we do enjoy threesomes, foursomes, including the other person. But one-on-one, we prefer to spend our time cuddling, talking, watching shows, and going on dates. My question is our relationship in trouble? It does concern me that we don't have sex, but it doesn't feel especially important to our relationship. I'm 25 and he is 33, and we are moving in together at the end of this month.
You describe your relationship as unintentionally companionate. Sounds pretty intentional to me. It sounds like this is what you both kind of sort of want, even if you haven't talked about it. Intentional, just not verbalized, not discussed. You need to discuss it with your boyfriend. You are content in this relationship. Sounds like you love your boyfriend a lot. Sounds like he loves you a lot. It doesn't sound like a strong sexual connection has ever really characterized this relationship. Is that a problem? Well, there's not a certain amount of sex that 2 people have to be having to legitimize the relationship in the world's eyes. If you're doing what works for you 2 and you are both happy and on the same page about this, then it's literally not a problem. Could take a picture of you 2, put it in my Savage Love dictionary next to "this is not a problem." It's only a problem if he's incontent. He's not content and continent. If he's incontinent, yeah, that would be a problem. It's only a problem if he is not content and you are not content. You got to talk to each other about it. And I think you have to be straight, particularly before you move in with each other. You need to be really direct with each other. Obviously, a strong sexual connection isn't a part of our relationship. I love cuddling you. I love being your intimate partner. I love being your romantic partner. And the sex between us has never been particularly passionate and never been particularly important or defining of our relationship. I don't have a problem with that. I'm happy in this with you largely companionate relationship and us having the occasional threesome together and us seeking outside sex with other people. This works for me. Does it work for you? And if the answer to that question is yes, what you guys are doing, what you guys are, works for him and it works for you, then this relationship works. Now, that's a conversation you'll need to keep having. Even if you guys were fucking like crazy right now and had been from the start, the conversation about sex and whether the relationship works for you, works for him, isn't one that just fucking all the time means you can duck or dodge or avoid, and isn't one that just being companionate and content now means you can never have that conversation again and you can duck and avoid it in the future. You're going to have to keep talking with your boyfriend over the years about where you're at, what you're doing, how you're relating to each other sexually and otherwise works. If you're both still happy, and whether you need to renegotiate terms in the future. But yeah, make this explicit. Have this conversation with your boyfriend. This is obviously who we are. It's obviously working. We're moving in together. Are you happy? I'm happy. Are you happy? And if he's happy and you're happy, I'm happy for you, and no one can tell you, and you shouldn't tell each other that who you are and how your relationship works right now isn't working when it's so clearly and obviously, if he is happy and you are happy, clearly and obviously is working. This episode of the Savage Lovecast is brought to you by Euphoria, makers of products for amazing sex, the kind of sex you want to have. Products including arousal oil, clean lube, bath salts, and suppositories. People are literally saying things like this about Euphoria's products. This is a quote. I had a 3-minute orgasm and then a 5-minute orgasm and felt like I was surfing in a perpetual wave pool of pleasure. And another quote, we use Awaken, and when she gets on top, we both come so hard that we see sounds and hear colors. And it doesn't hurt when GQ calls you the best sex product of the year, and Shape says you are the best invention since the vibrator. Now, this is a little personal, but Terry and I tried the suppository, and leave it to Euphoria to make suppositories sexy. They did it. I'm not sure what they put in there. I know there's CBD at least, but they have some serious love potion energy. So yeah, you have my permission to try this. I fully endorse you to go ahead and treat yourself to more, deeper, fuller pleasure wherever you can find it as often as possible. And you can start with a bottle of Euphoria. Euphoria is offering a special deal for our listeners. Get 20% off your first order by visiting www.euphoria.wellness.com/savage or use the code SAVAGE at checkout. That's FORIA wellness.com/savage for 20% off your first order. I recommend trying their Awaken Arousal Oil and Sex Oil. You'll thank me later.
Hey Dan, Nancy, and the Tech Savvy at-risk youth. I'm an Aussie guy who's generally experienced in group play, but I'm not really experienced in double penetration. I'm considering joining a couple for a threesome and would really like to help her tick double penetration off her bucket list. Just to be clear, she'd like one cock in a pussy and one in her ass. So we all like to research and be well prepared before we do things, but the articles that I'm finding through Google seem pretty superficial, and the video searches are really just porn. Do you or any of your expert guests have tips on great detailed resources for DP newbies? Or failing that, if any of your listeners want to share what they wish they knew before they got double fucked, I'd be grateful for that too.
I have a little bit of personal experience with double penetration, but it was 2 dicks, 1 ass, which requires a lot of patience, time, warming up, deep breathing, communication while you're trying to pull that off. And the most challenging logistical element of it was just getting everyone into the right positions, into positions that people could sustain. And it seems to me that if you had 2 holes instead of 1 hole, that it would be a bit easier to pull that off or push that in. but I've never done vaginal anal DP, only one anus, two dicks DP. If there are listeners out there who've done this particular kind of DP and you have some situational expertise, if you'd like to share your after action reports, please give us a call or drop a comment at savage.love on this week's podcast, and we will make sure that this caller sees your comments or hears your comments. Gotta say, though, that seems to me that this woman, if she's really interested in double penetration, that this is something that for her own comfort in the moment, she could experiment with in advance of the pressure of, your expectations, her partner's expectations, her own expectations during a three-way. And that would, of course, be solo with toys, with a couple of dildos, or with her partner and a dildo, just to see how that feels and if that is a pleasurable feeling for her to have something in her vaginal canal, have something in her pussy at the same time that something is in her butt. Pro tip when it comes to DP, usually, you can see a lot of videos out there where both people who are inside someone are banging away. Usually, and I've my own personal experience, sorry to gross people out, Grandpa's talking about his own dick here for a second, but also conversations I've had with other gay people, and including some straight people I know who've experimented with double penetration, is that usually it's one person is hard and staying still while the other person who's hard and inside the person being doubly penetrated is fucking. And there's just some element of a relay race about it. It's not two people slamming away at once. It's one person staying still, enjoying the sensations, the soaking sensations, as the Mormons would call it, while the other person fucks, and maybe some trading off and going back and forth, working your way up to perhaps both people fucking the person who's getting doubly penetrated at that moment. But you get there very slowly, very gradually, and with a lot of communication. And the person who's being doubly penetrated really does have to be in charge. I think when it comes to anal penetration, really any sort of penetration, we like to fantasize about, our bodies being taken control of, about the person who's, fucking us, fucking our bodies. But there has to be this other consciousness at the same time where the person being penetrated has control, not some control, particularly about the pace. There is a moment when you're getting fucked where the person fucking you can really go for it, can really start slamming, but there's a buildup to that moment. And unfortunately, in a lot of porn that substitutes for people's sex education these days, tragically, that buildup, the warm-up, the foreplay, which doesn't stop when someone is inside of you, it continues after someone is inside of you. There is still warm-up happening after someone is inside of you. That gets left out. That gets edited out. In reality, in partnered sex, you can't edit that out. There has to be that warm-up post-penetration where the person is allowed to breathe, adjust, relax, open up. And if you rush into slamming before that person who's being penetrated, singly or doubly or triply or quadruply, has a chance to relax, it's not going to work. Not going to work for the person getting fucked. And when it's not working for the person getting fucked, it rarely works for the person doing the fucking, and it should never work for the person, or persons in this case, doing the fucking.
Hi, Dan, Nancy, and the At-Risk Youth. I have a question for you about asexuality. So, for background, my friend and I were talking about sexuality, and I was saying I was horny, and then she started talking about never feeling desire, horniness, or the impulse to engage in sex. For context, she's 27 and she's had one boyfriend who she did have sex with, but she also says she never really felt like she wanted to have sex, but she felt comfortable and safe trying sex with him. So we talked further about this, and I presented the option to her of being ace or gray sexual, and she pushed back at this and said she was more unsure about her sexuality and felt it might be repressed. She also said that she doesn't want to be asexual because she wants a relationship. And I did tell her that other people who are asexual have loving and sometimes very intimate relationships, but she doesn't want that or seem to think that it's possible. She also said that she's masturbated and will feel the muscles contract but derives no pleasure from it. So I guess my question is, can someone who is maybe asexual change their desire and become more sexual. I realize this can almost be offensive because you're born with a sexual orientation, but she seems very unhappy and frustrated that she doesn't have sexual desire. And my second question is, what resources are available for someone who has a muscle contraction but no pleasure from masturbation? I'm assuming the contraction is the physiological response, the orgasm, but there's no pleasure.
Joining me to help tackle this question, Dr. Laurie Brotto, professor at the University of British Columbia, where she has done a lot of research into asexuality, amongst so many other things. Dr. Brotto, welcome back to the Savage Lovecast.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
So what do you think here? This person is diagnosing her friend as possibly asexual or gray sexual, and her friend is rejecting that because she wants to have a relationship and thinks that that's in conflict, that an asexual person not only doesn't want to have sex, but doesn't want to have love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, the caller asked the question, can someone change their desire and become more sexual? I mean, really, they're asking, can someone change asexuality? No, by definition, an asexual person cannot change their identity or their desire. What they can change is their behavior. They might change their decision why they're having sex. There are plenty of ace people who are partnered with people who still want to have sex and identify as sexual. And so ace folks might continue to want to have sex. Maybe it's pleasurable for them. Maybe they want to do it for their relationship, but they're certainly not doing it out of their own sexual desire. So the other part of the caller's question is about, can you still be in a relationship if you identify as asexual? And this is an area where we actually know a fair bit about. There's our lab and others have asked this question about the nature of relationships among asexual people. And it turns out that probably about 3/4 of them identify as, quote, romantic, which means they want to be in relationships for all of the non-sexual benefits that sexual people still have. So companionship and trust and security and longevity and all of those sorts of things. So by definition, just because one is ace does not mean that they are aromantic.
So people are born with their sexual orientations, but it sometimes takes us time to figure them out. And, I want to preface this question by saying I've known people who identified as lesbian and then later in life decided that they were heterosexual. Lots of gays and lesbians identified as bi for a time. It's sometimes the case that people identify themselves, and then, the same people who say sexuality and gender identity is fluid will freak out when you say that somebody who thinks of themselves as ace may be experiencing a kind of sexual repression that, a little bit of therapy could just nail down whether you're actually ace or if there's some block there that's interfering with your ability to really, identify or inhabit your sexual orientation. Is that, I'm saying that this is true of gays, lesbians, bisexuals. There are tons of people in the world who identify as straight, who no longer identify as straight. Is it possible that somebody identifies as asexual who later realizes that they're gray sexual, which means there's some sexual desire there, or they're not asexual at all?
Yeah. So, I mean, you probably know my answer because I'm a sex therapist, and this is part of what I do is I help explore with people who are questioning their identity, including their asexuality, around whether it is indeed asexuality or is it something else. So I know the caller wondered whether this person's sexuality was repressed, meaning is there some kind of past trauma or something happened in their life that accounts for their lack of desire, lack of sexual attraction. And definitely working with a qualified healthcare provider, ideally a sex therapist who is familiar and friendly to asexuality and sexual health in general, is a really good idea because, just sort of reading items on a scale and deciding I'm ace or not doesn't give you the context. And also identity is something that maybe needs to be tried out in different scenarios and might evolve over time. So bottom line is I actually would advocate that this person maybe talk to a qualified professional.
Who's familiar with asexuality, not ace-phobic. And I think it's really, I really want to highlight something that you just said there, that you can find a therapist who is not ace-phobic, who believes that asexuality is a legitimate, valid sexual orientation, but also knows that there's some exploration that might need to happen there.
Yeah.
Not to negate somebody's sexual orientation, not to tell them that they're wrong, but to really help them figure out whether that's who they are and then affirm if that's who they are.
Yeah.
But there may be some challenging that happens there and some deep work that has to happen there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And unfortunately, I do know and have come across healthcare providers, including some who are sex therapists over the years, that really doubt the existence of asexuality and are absolutely convinced that, this is some kind of manifestation of depression or PTSD. And actually, it was someone who suggested that to me about 10 years ago at a conference that led our group to do a study on that very question about trauma in asexual people. And we really found absolutely no evidence for it. And since then, other groups have found the same thing, that all the data suggests that that's not the case. So yeah, have those things assessed and make sure that they're being assessed in the care of someone who is ace friendly and ace knowledgeable.
So let's talk about the other issue that the caller raised. It's about her friend. Masturbates, experiences orgasmic contractions from the sound of things, but no pleasure. How common is that?
Yeah, so orgasm by definition, at least when we look at female-bodied people, orgasm doesn't necessarily mean pleasure as well. It's mostly focused on what are the physiological signs, the muscle contractions, the uterine contractions. So this situation where the person is having those physical signs of orgasm, but is saying, I don't feel anything, I don't feel pleasure, there's no mental arousal, is something that has been coined pleasure dissociative orgasmic dysfunction, or PDOD. We know almost nothing about it other than there's been a handful of case studies that have been described. Researchers are starting to collect some data on this, but it's probably more common than we think it is, and more common in female-bodied people than male-bodied people. There's some suggestion that, could be related to using a certain medication that's blocking that brain-body communication. There could be other physical reasons why the person's brain is not picking up those pleasure signals. So it is a real entity. And again, my recommendation, be assessed, have a full workup, a physical medical workup to really assess some of the sensory nerves as well that give rise to that kind of emotional pleasure in the brain. But we need way more research on this entity.
Dr. Laurie Brotto, professor at the University of British Columbia, thank you so much for coming back on the Savage Lovecast.
Thanks, Dan.
Hi, Dan. 30-something-year-old trans woman calling, and I have a question about oral sex and claustrophobia, of all things. So, in the last 24 hours, I've gone down on 2 different partners, one being cis male and one being cis female. And each time I've had a little bit of a bout of claustrophobia. So with the cis male partner, I would go down on him, like me on my knees, me facing his stomach. And each time I would have like a little bit of claustrophobia after like a few seconds. Same thing with my cis female partner today. I would go down on her and I would get claustrophobic and would have to stop. Now, this seems really weird to me, as I used to be sometimes smothered by her, and I used to honestly gag on a lot of cock and love it. And now I just get really claustrophobic. My cis female partner thinks that potentially I have a little bit of psychosomatic issues going on due to some trauma. One of my other partners, a part-time dominant, she thinks that maybe there's some trauma or some mistrust that happened in a scene and maybe it's kind of carried on. I'm not fully sure, but I do know that I'm not enjoying my favorite hobby. And, oh my God, help, I miss going down on people. It's so much fun. And I don't want to lose that. And I love being able to, please my partners. And, oh my God, help, what the fuck is that?
So in the last 24 hours, you tried to suck a dick and you wanted to gag on that dick the way you've enjoyed gagging on dick in the past. And you tried to eat a pussy and you wanted to be smothered by that pussy in the way you've enjoyed being smothered by a pussy in the past. And it didn't work for you. And what's a likelier explanation of why those 2 attempts at the kind of oral sex that you enjoy performing didn't work in the last 24 hours? Are you claustrophobic? Is that the likeliest explanation here? Is that the story and perhaps the self-reinforcing narrative that you're going to tell yourself? Or are you going to tell yourself that for whatever reason, just yesterday, gagging on cock and being smothered by pussy wasn't working for you, and you're going to set those things aside for a little bit and circle back to them later and see if it was just something about yesterday, something that you can't quite put your finger on about yesterday that made you bump on those sex acts, that made them not as enjoyable as they had been for you in the past. And, after a week or two, you'll circle back, you'll check again and see. That's one way you could approach this. Or you could spend a lot of time in the last 24 hours drilling down and trying to dig up a reason, an explanation for why these things that you used to enjoy or always have enjoyed but didn't enjoy in the last 24 hours didn't work for you in the last 24 hours. And maybe it's trauma. Maybe you had a bad experience with a partner recently where, I don't know, your air was cut off or something. And so now you're a little flinchy or hesitant about it. Maybe the person who cut your air off before, this woman who has smothered you with her pussy in the past and you've enjoyed it, and this cock that you've gagged on in the past and enjoyed it. That recent experience with those sensations was so unpleasant that you're bumping on it right now, that you're not able to tap into what's pleasurable about that kind of loss of control right now. And so you just need to set this aside and not, I worry that if you diagnose yourself as claustrophobic and if you attribute this to a trauma that is going to be lasting, that you're going to understand or frame as a trauma that must be lasting, have this lasting impact on your sexual pleasure and sexual enjoyment. Otherwise, it wasn't traumatic, which is not true. Something can be traumatic and not have a lasting impact, that you're going to rob yourself potentially. Because, as Vonnegut said, the stories we tell about ourselves become true. And I'm butchering that, paraphrasing that badly. I should take a second to look it up maybe. And I will next time before I cite it. I think before you psychoanalyze yourself or before you allow somebody that you know to psychoanalyze you, that you should just step back. Because sometimes something that works for us usually just doesn't work for us for a reason that we can't articulate, and maybe for no reason at all. It just, for whatever reason, something that I often enjoy didn't work for me today at this moment. And yeah, I don't think that we should, when it happens just that one time or two times in 24 hours, we should waste too much time or effort doing a kind of forensic accounting to figure out, to dig up an explanation as to why. Sometimes something that we usually enjoy, something vanilla, something kinky, just something doesn't work for us. And yeah, we should just not force ourselves to do anything in the moment that's not working for us, even if it's something that works for us usually or has worked for us in the past, and then set that thing aside, or those things aside, for a moment, for a few days, and then check back in with that smothering pussy, check back in with that throat-filling cock, and see how you feel later. And if it continues to be a problem, okay, then maybe some forensic accounting, some digging deep to figure out what might have happened that suddenly ruined for you this thing that used to be so pleasurable for you might be called for. Or it might not. You might be pleasantly surprised that in a week, when you're gagging on a dick again, you'll be loving it, or being smothered by that pussy again. You will be loving it. All right, before we get to this week's listener response calls, let's check in on the comments on last week's show at savage.love. Callie writes, for the couple looking to use dating apps without their kids knowing, you can block people by their phone number. That's how they sign up. Easy peasy. I think it's mostly designed to avoid exes and stalkers, but it'll work for your kids for sure. Another listener suggested filtering out certain age groups so only people in your preferred age range can see your ad, which means so long as you're not looking to play with people around the same age as your kids, you won't see your kids' ads and they won't see yours. And finally, Tim, a hockey player and Savage Lovecast fan, says, Pride nights are not just for fans, they're for players. Hockey has an openly gay player, Luke Prokop, who happens to belong to my favorite team, the Nashville Predators. And there are certainly closeted players on teams. The goal of the campaign, Pride Nights at Hockey Arenas, isn't just to sell jerseys, Dan. It's to tell the many gay men and women who are passionate about hockey that they are welcome. All right, thanks to everyone who wrote in to tell me that they're Magnum subs and longtime listeners and hockey fans. I didn't think there was much overlap there, but apparently there is, and you can color me pleasantly surprised Tim made some great points here, and his comment goes on. Go to savage.love to read his entire comment. And to be clear to everybody, as I think I was in that intro, I am fine with Pride Nights. Just let's please stop trying to cram all the actual players on an entire team into Pride jerseys and making heroes to the right of the ones who refuse. And final thought, there's a hockey team called the Predators in 2023. The Predators? Really? And they haven't had to change their name? Do all the players, when they're not wearing Pride jerseys, wear Roman collars? Is the team comprised entirely of youth pastors? Is Donald Trump the captain? Inquiring minds want to know. Thanks to everyone who commented on the show last week at savage.love. We read all your comments. We love them. Please keep them coming. And thank you for posting about the show to your own social media accounts and spreading the word about the Savage Lovecast. We really appreciate that. And now, something else we really appreciate week after week, listener response calls.
Hi, Dan. This is a response call to the caller in episode 857 who was worried that they'd come across their children on dating sites and things like that. Well, I was thinking to maybe get ahead of the game. Borrow their phone for a second while they're gone to the toilet or something and block your own profile on the dating app. And then you don't have to worry. However, I realize there may be ethical problems with that.
Hey, Dan, I'm calling in response to episode 857 for the caller that was looking for a large quantity of blood, and the advice that you gave her about using stage blood like they use in film is terrible advice, Dan. I hate to say it, but I'm a professional makeup artist, and we battle this every Halloween with people that are using the wrong types of blood for the wrong types of things. And I hate to say it, but most blood is used for external use only. You have to read the back of the bottle. There are some that are used for the mouth. There are some that are used for the eye, but they're not interchangeable. And unfortunately, I do not know of any that have been approved for vaginal use. But your suggestion of making a homemade option does seem like a great idea in theory, but I would suggest that the caller be wary that these are mostly made with cornstarch and could be a yeast infection waiting to happen. So stay safe and read the instruction on where to use your blood.
Hi, Dan. Big Lesbian here. And because you have big lesbians listening to your podcast, you have big lesbian hockey fans listening to your podcast. Please don't forget about us. Some of us like to watch trashy reality TV, and some of us like to watch fast-paced sports with a side of grown men punching each other in the face. But thank you for what you said about all the bullshit going on in the NHL. I really just want to watch hockey. And I know that many of them are probably giant homophobes, but don't take away my queer joy. And my queer joy is watching hockey and seeing my wife in her hockey gear getting ready to fuck me.
And we're going to leave it there. Got a question for next week's Lovecast or something to say about something I said on this week's Lovecast? You can go to savage.love/askdan to record your question or your comment, or you can use the voice memo app on your phone and email your question or comment to q@savage.love, or you can call and leave us a message at 206-302-2064. Hump is heading abroad for our first ever European tour. Zurich, Berlin, Amsterdam, Munich. Hump is coming to you. And I will be coming to Berlin to personally host screenings on April 21st and 22nd at Movie Mento. Go to humpfilmfest.com/Europe for all the tour dates. And I will see you in Berlin very, very soon. And Hump continues to tour in the United States and Canada, of course. Hump 2023. Go to humpfilmfest.com for cities, showtimes, and tickets. Follow me on Instagram and Spoutable @DanSavage. Follow me on Twitter, still @FakeDanSavage. Follow Mistress Matisse on Twitter @Mistress Matisse, and please follow Dr. Lori Brotto on Twitter @Dr. Lori Brotto. The Savage Lovecast is produced every week by Nancy Hartunian, and me and the tech-savvy at-risk youth and Nancy. We will all be back at you next week for an installment of the Savage Lovecast. Thank you for downloading.